So today we're going to finish off my interview with ethnohistorian April Farnham, and we're going to talk about some of the families, these mixed families of Spanish and indigenous people that came together in the late 18th century and populated California down into the 19th century. April's going to talk about specific names, people, places, especially in Northern California, in the area north of San Francisco, and get into what their contributions, what their lives were like. And we're going to bring it back as far as the Anza Expedition, which brought the whole big group of settlers from what is today northern Mexico, southern Arizona, Sonora, to California, and to specifically the northern part of the San Francisco Bay Area. We're even going to talk about, what it was like to be a Californiana, Mexican California woman, and live in the South of the United States during the 1860s, at the time of the Civil War. So there are some real fascinating details that April's going to lead us through, and I hope you will find some interesting nuggets in it. I definitely did, and I'm really looking forward to the things that April is going to publish and write about in the future. So let's sit back and watch or listen to my interview with April Farnham. Is there anything recently, or even not so recently, that has surprised you, or that maybe was unexpected that you found out?
Yeah. So in looking specifically at these matrimonial investigations, the one that was done particularly for Maria's grandmother, Veridiana, and the soldier that she married, Marcos Villa, it's really been a fascinating window to a couple of scholars I really respect and admire, Rosemary Beebe, right, and Robert Sankiewicz, in their research and their writings. The fact that the soldiers themselves had a direct participation in these marriages and baptisms, both as witnesses, and padrinos, godparents, very directly involved, right, with these, at least it seems, again, from the writing, with these different events. And I knew about Compondrosco, I knew about godparentage and the importance of that. There's a really great book, Father of All, by Luis Pubos. They had us read in graduate school. And that really gave me appreciation for how much the De la Guerras were involved when the different baptism ceremonies and marriages down south. But just recently looking at, some of these matrimonial investigations, it's really given me appreciation for how involved, particularly like these early soldiers of the different, founding Spanish expeditions of California, like the Anza Expedition or the Portola Expedition, how much they were involved, right, in these early intermarriages between soldiers and Native women at the missions. That's been particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. And didn't some of your research has actually gone back to the Anza Expedition, right? To Maria Feliciana Arballo and her descendants and the Juarez women are connected to her line as well. Am I wrong, or am I getting two things mixed up?
Well, no, you're not getting them mixed up. So it has to do. It's not a direct blood lineage. So what it is Veridiana Maria. She was from a local village in Monterey called Achasta, which we think might have been a rancheria that was created. Again, I'm going by some of research by Randy Milliken. That was created relocated right next to Mission Carmel, right, for the purposes of converting local Costanoan, Rumsen, Esalen people to the Catholic religion in that area. And so her parents were specifically, sorry, I have to look up the names here real quick, apologize. Her father's name was Joseph Cristobal Carillo, right? That was his Spanish baptized name, his Christianized name. And the reason why he had this last name Carillo is because his godparent at his baptism was Jose Raimundo Carillo, right? One of the founding clan fathers, if you will, of the Carillo family in San Diego, right? Jose Raimundo Carillo. So his connection with Maria, in terms of the Carillo surname, Maria had married, my understanding, Joaquin Carillo, and Jose Raimundo and Joaquin, and you might know more about this than I do, so feel free to jump in, Damien, on this. As far as I can tell, the lineage is Jose Raimundo and Joaquin were either brothers or one was a nephew uncle. It was that type of relationship. So it's by marriage, right, that Jose Cristobal Carillo and his wife Delfina de Jesus Carillo, right, they had a daughter, Viridiana Maria Carillo, would have been her quote unquote maiden name, right, but maiden name in terms of, under the Spanish doctrine of marriage in the mission institution, that possibly, right, this kinship was understood between Maria Juarez and Maria Carillo. I can't prove that for sure. I haven't seen anything yet in the writing or the letters that the two of them understood that they had this kinship. It's possible, though. I'll give credit to Jennifer Lucido, who I know you've had on your show before. She wrote an amazing article, her and Scott Lydon, for Bulletin 2018, Patriarchal Brokers and Cultural Bedfellows, where she explains very clearly how Maria Carillo was multilingual. She knew the Diegueño languages, right, in San Diego area. And then when she came up here to Sonoma and established her rancho outside of Santa Rosa, she quickly taught herself some of the local, I think not just Patwin, but Pomo and possibly maybe even Wapo dialects, local dialects. And similarly, Maria Juarez was multilingual, and Maria seemed to have a relationship with her, the indigenous servants that she had working for her on her rancho, in the same way that Maria Juarez did here in Napa. So I can't help but think that perhaps they did at one time run into each other, especially when Maria and Cayetano were living briefly in Sonoma before they moved to Napa. There was housing there for the soldiers' families, not just at the barracks when Vallejo moved over there in 1833, but there was soldiers' housing for the Escolta guards, right? And Cayetano was part of the original Escoltas that served the Padres at Mission San Francisco Solano. So he was there as early as 1827. And shortly there, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, knowing how connected all these families were, and the small number of people there were, non-indigenous people. I can't imagine that they wouldn't have known each other. It would seem to me, even if there's not evidence that yet, it would seem that they must have known each other and interacted.
I think they did, and possibly even Benicia Vallejo. Being that Maria Carillo was her mother, And, Francesca Benicia Carrillo was her maiden name before she became a Vallejo, possibly had some interaction with Maria Juarez through the husband, through Cayetano. Cayetano is often cited as a loyal friend of Mariano. They go back to like Monterey Presidio days. I think so. Vallejo was born first, and then Cayetano was born a couple of years afterwards, but they kind of grew up as childhood friends, is my understanding. Cayetano was a pretty loyal soldier who served under, Vallejo's supervision. And his reward for that loyalty, right, and his service was Rancho Tulacay. So there was definitely, it seemed like a close relationship there, friendship. And, Cayetano was there when Mariano was arrested by the Bear Flaggers, right? He sent his brother to try to rescue Mariano en route to Sutter's Fort, but at the time Mariano declined, and there's a whole story, you can look that up. And that was Cayetano's brother Vicente, I believe that was his first name. And so he was always speaking up and writing on Mariano's behalf. And so it to me, it would seem natural that at some point, I'm sure Benicia had some kind of relationship or at least acquaintance with Maria.
Reading through his testimony, right? It almost seemed like this is Cayetano, it almost seemed like he was defending himself at a certain point for not having rescued General Vallejo when he was imprisoned by the Bear Flaggers. And he makes the point, well, my brother went over there and he thought it would be too dangerous. So he told him not to rescue him. And I also thought it was funny that the brother dressed as a woman, right, to kind of sneak in and talk to them and then sneak out. There's so many of these stories that are still hidden in the archives that are little by little trickling out, but there's still so much to know.
Absolutely. And like I said, I keep peeling back the layers, and every time I find a new name of a soldier or, a wife or, so just in that one matrimonial document that was translated, there's so many different names that have sent me, in different research paths. One other one I'll highlight in that matrimonial investigation was, so one of the soldier witnesses who signed off on the letter for the matrimonial investigation was Vicente Briones, right? Vincent Briones, who was Juana Briones' grandfather, and also one of these early soldiers on the, I think it's the Anza Expedition. And just the fact that he was there at that time, and he was signing off on other intermarriages as well, right? With Padre Lasuen, Furman Lasuen. So that, every time I find names like that, it just fascinates me. And I want to learn more about those particular individuals, and how they connect to this story, right? That so far has been centered on Maria Juarez, but again, it's like, it's becoming bigger and bigger. And more all-encompassing.
Where are things leading you right now? What direction are you working on at this moment?
With this story or with other?
Well, with that story, but if you've got other stories as well, that'd be interesting to know too.
So, I definitely want to, with the translation of Cayetano's Testimonio, and then this matrimonial investigation that kind of traces Maria Juarez's lineage right back to the indigenous peoples. I do want to write an article, a serious article for Bulletin or another publication to talk about that. And then, I recently started reading some of the letters of another woman, a California woman named Maria Amparo Ruiz, who had a highly educated Californiana woman, which was unusual for the time, who she had a direct relationship with Mariano Vallejo, a correspondence. And a few scholars have written about her, but a lot of her letters have just been published in Spanish, and which I think is wonderful. But I think it would also help the general public to understand a little bit more about, specifically about the Californios' feelings about the Bear Flag Revolt and about annexation. If those letters were all translated from Spanish to English, my understanding is Rosemary Beebe and Dr. Sienkiewicz, Dr. Beebe and Dr. Sienkiewicz have already translated a few of those letters and will be publishing them. But there's a whole collection, different archives. One of them is at the Santa Barbara Archives Library. I think another collection is at the Huntington Library, where I would like to kind of, go down that rabbit hole, so to speak, and see if we can't translate those letters so we can understand more about Mr. Vallejo himself, right? And what his values were, and, why did he choose to correspond so much with this particular Californiana woman, and see what light she could shed, right, on the history here at Sonoma through the American period. So that's kind of where I'm going right now with that.
Didn't she write a novel, The Squatter and the Dawn? Is that Maria Amparo Ruiz?
Yeah, a couple of them. Yeah, but Squatter and the Dawn, supposedly the Dawn character is based on Mariano, inspired by him and his life. I forget the other book she wrote. She wrote a couple books, and she was married to a Civil War gentleman, Civil War officer, lived in the South for a while. So and that is very interesting to me, right? How she navigated this, she was a Californiana in the 1860s, living in the American South, and she still had very strong feelings about the way in which Mexican California had been annexed by the U.S. But then she also had very strong feelings and opinions about the Civil War itself and what was going on there. So just really fascinating lady. And I've just now, just the tip of the research, tip of the iceberg in terms of what I'm learning about her and reading up on her life. And, like I said, some people have written full biographies on her, but as far as I can tell, nobody's published all of her letters in English, just mostly Spanish.
Yeah, if they had, I think we'd probably know, because I'm certainly not aware of it.
Yeah, and I realize that anytime there's a translation from one language to another, as I witnessed and experienced with translating Hawaiian newspaper articles right into English, that there's some cultural meanings lost. There's some understandings, right, that are sometimes lost in translation, and so I respect, wanting to publish right in the original language that it was written. But again, I think if it could be published in multiple languages, then it would just go further in educating everybody, right, about that history.
Yeah, I agree. And when you have both languages, then you can sort of start a dialogue about okay, what is the meaning of this and what is the meaning of that in its context, and you can go back and forth, but yeah, you need them both, and you definitely need them both, even though there are a growing number of Spanish speaking people in California, which is great, but we also need, the vast majority of people are still mainly English speakers, and I think for English speakers to be able to access that material, it also helps make round out the picture of our history better, right? Because you do get access to things that you wouldn't have access to otherwise, and helps you complete the mosaic, so to speak. So yeah, right. I agree.
Definitely.
I didn't know that. Have you oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay.
Have you interacted with any Juarez descendants?
I did briefly. So shortly after we moved here to Napa, I had a stint as a librarian at Napa County Library, and one of my first talks was about just kind of what I learned about these basket collections and the connection to the Juarez family. And so some of the descendants, so they were, as I recall, they were the children and grandchildren of Vivian Rose Juarez, who, like I said, wrote that book, Past is Father of the Present. And they came, again, I think they were from the Vallejo area. And they were surprised so this is always gratifying to me, right? They were surprised to learn that where those baskets ended up, right? They didn't realize that, like, the sewing basket that Maria Juarez had now doesn't reside with California State Parks. It resides over at the Phoebe Hearst Museum collection, right? And I think they were seeing that basket for the first time in probably years. I don't know. And I could be wrong, but I think they were also surprised to kind of understand this connection to the indigenous peoples of Napa, because the family memoirs themselves are so focused on the Spanish and Mexican lineage from those early Anza Expedition soldiers and families coming into California, that that maybe the indigenous parts of the story had kind of been erased a little bit over time. And so I'm hoping to reconnect with these individuals. I know that they were also consulted when the old adobe here in Napa was fully restored. And hopefully, maybe they'd be willing to, sit down and share their memories. Maybe they have stories, family histories that were passed down that weren't documented previously. Again, to really kind of maybe build up this Maria story a little bit more. Cayetano gets a lot of credit here in all the Napa history books, and Maria's kind of like, okay, she's a soldier's wife. She's holding down the fort, the adobe. But obviously she had a little more significant role to play, I think, in early Napa's history, and in the Mexican period.
Well, I think there's a big movement. There's a movement now that started some years back to bring out the stories of these women because their role was so central. And I think that, as you're demonstrating, a lot of it was in maintaining and preserving culture, but also in connecting different cultures, right? The Hispanic, the indigenous, and of course, women who married Anglo-Americans or Russians, for that matter, or Hawaiians, right? They played such a huge role from that standpoint, and there seems to be a movement to bring them out and tell their stories, which I think is great. And I also think that one of the things that I'm seeing is that when you do local history or work on local families like you're doing, that really these families, especially in the Spanish and Mexican periods, had connections all over the state, the territory, right? And so
Right.
even if it's a family in Napa, right, they have connections in Monterey, in San Diego, in San Francisco, in Sonoma. And so it's never really the story of just a small isolated place, but it's a web of connections and relationships that spreads all over the coast.
It really is. One phrase you used in one of your podcasts earlier is this kind of the interweb or complicated kind of complex fabric, right? Mm-hmm. Social fabric that was created through this system of Campandrasco and baptism and so forth in the Spanish and Mexican period. And I every day I see evidence of that here in the history that I talk about and write about for Napa and Sonoma. Can I mention one other book that was kind of very influential in my research for this? I neglected earlier to mention that one of the first books I read when we moved here to Napa it's called This Land Was Mexican Once by Linda Heidenreich. And so I get credit for really kind of shifting the focus first from Cayetano to Maria Juarez and talking about, some of the indigenous history here in Napa. So I feel like I'm just kind of continuing on that work, right, adding to the story, because there was a few things, again, as I was peeling away the layers in my primary source research that I don't think Linda was aware of, right? Like these baskets that I was mentioning in the state park collection and the Phoebe Hearst Museum collection, and how that was evidence of her involvement with the indigenous community. And also the fact that mission records prove that she had this direct blood, lineal descent to the indigenous women in the Monterey region. So.
Yeah, I agree. I met Linda this last October in Kansas City at the Western History Association conference, and I talked to her. I saw her there and struck up a conversation with her because both of us having grown up in the Napa Valley, and I had read her book, and so it was great to meet her, and I think that book she wrote is exactly that. It's a great focus on the Napa area, but also exactly the lives of the women who lived there. And I think hopefully it can be sort of a pattern for other books like that.
Yeah, I agree. And when I was working at the Napa Valley Museum, that book was like essential reading for all the interpretive programs that we did, because it was one of the first books that I had encountered really focused on Napa Valley and the connections between the early pre-Mexican period, right, and the indigenous histories of Napa going through the Mexican Rancho period and then into the American period, and what with the focus on the Bear Flag Revolt and what was happening there. And so, love that book. Very influential.
Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to the more things that you're going to be doing. And I think that what you're doing now is very interesting and has a very broad appeal. And it's great the way that you sort of tie what you're doing to other scholars' research and how you're digging into the archives and bringing out these stories that need to be told and that I really think help expand our vision of California, of the West, and of this the complicated time period, which was the 19th century, right? I think there's so much that we still need to know about it. And I think you're really contributing a lot to it. So I want to really thank you for that. And appreciate you coming on the podcast, and hope you'll come back. And is there anything you want to mention about your work with Sonoma, Petaluma Parks? What interesting things there are for people to see if they happen to be in the area?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sonoma State Historic Park involves Mission San Francisco Solano and General Vallejo's home. And then we have our sister park, Petaluma Adobe. We are always having new events, activities. We recently had our women, one of the interpreters there organized a very popular women's history crawl event. It was attended by over 350 people. Different community groups came together, and we were talking about prominent women, historical women in and around the area. With Sparks, the Sonoma Petaluma Parks, they continue to sponsor lectures by scholars such as yourself. I gave a talk last week about a watercolor artist, little-known watercolor artist who did a lot of paintings of the missions and the adobes up and down California in the early 19th century. And they also sponsor music concerts. So there's always something fun and community oriented going on there, where people not just learn about history, right, but if they could bring their families. And we have Children's Day coming up in June. That's at the Sonoma Barracks. So if folks, want to learn more about these events, I highly encourage you to go to sonomaparks.org. They're the nonprofit group that supports our state park and everything that we do. So just check it out. And it's definitely worth a visit. I give lots of tours, public tours every day, fourth graders included, lots of school groups right now. But eventually also coming in the summer, we'll be offering tours 45 minutes to an hour to anybody in the public, adults or families that want to just, take a walk through the different structures and get a more, broader picture of Sonoma's history and the history there.
That's great. That's great. I think people that come to the Sonoma area, they know it's wine country, but I don't think that they often know how deep and fascinating the history is there as well. So it can really round out your visit, while you're, in addition to visiting the wineries and the art galleries and the other shops there, to really touch and see this great history that made the place what it is. So thank you for that and all the work you do over there.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, April, until next time, it's been great talking to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Damon. Appreciate being on the show.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code podcast, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.